Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. Welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am Amanda Panacea, and today I am joined by the incredibly insightful guest, Matt Coffman. He is a mineral nutritional balancing practitioner, an advanced Kambo practitioner, the host of Integrative Thoughts Podcast, which is ranked in the top 5%. And he has also co-founded Valence Nutraceuticals, a company focused on mineral balancing solutions in partnerships with other mineral balancing practitioners. In this episode, we explore the fascinating connections between minerals and health. We dive into topics like the role of manganese in Lyme disease, the impact of trauma and mineral imbalances in chronic conditions like Lyme and mold, and how tools like HTMA testing can guide your healing journey. Matt also shares his experiences and expertise on psychedelics, addiction recovery, and his passion for integrating minerals and trauma work into holistic care. If you've ever wondered how minerals like calcium, lithium, and manganese influence your health, or how they intersect with issues like Lyme, mold, addiction, this episode is packed with insights and actionable knowledge that can help you with transforming your health. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy the podcast. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am your host, Amanda Panacea, and today I'm really excited to be getting to sit down and chat with Matt Coffman. He has a really good podcast called Integrative Thoughts I am a huge fan of, so I'm really excited to sit down and have a long conversation about your history as you on the other side. And you also are a big fan and a mineral balancing HTMA practitioner, as well as a Kambo practitioner. So that should be an interesting little piece that we can talk about as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here. Wherever you want to take the discussion, let me know.
Yeah, for sure. So I love to hear the pain to passion story. And I think you and I have a lot in common with regards to past drug, alcohol, partying. I think that our generation, specifically around our age group, was probably the most intense when it comes to how far can we take drinking and drug use. Just my thoughts on that. But yeah, tell us a little bit about like how you came into this space, why you became interested in health and wellness.
Yeah, so I mean, I take people back usually generally to my childhood, for one, just growing up in Flint, Michigan, more kind of lower level, low income type scenario with just the overall surroundings, low level consciousness, lots of criminal activity, like very normalized drug use, partying, things like that. But also I had kind of two simultaneous, like, I guess traumas, I would say, like occurring simultaneously. So for one, my mom was amazing, but she didn't always pick the best, fathers. Like both the fathers left. She caught my dad smoking crack when I was like 1 or 2 or something. And it was in the 80s. He probably was just doing the normal, I don't know, cocaine and partying. And it probably just escalated, I would imagine. Probably didn't know as much about where crack would take you back then. It was a little bit newer on the scene, but it just in general, it escalated. So she kicked him out. So I was, fatherless, no really role models. My mom had to work a lot to support me, my brother. She was even taking care of my 2 older brothers. So my mom had endured a lot of trauma as well from my grandfather was pretty abusive. So I think that probably cycled into her choice of men in general. But nevertheless, she did the best. She always had food on the table, but she worked a lot. She would work night shifts. And so there wasn't a lot of like emotional space, I would say, that a lot of normal people get, right? I kind of, a lot of times at night would just be with my older brothers, my older cousins, which was like kind of fun and cool, and video games and wrestling from that aspect. Like when you're a kid, you don't really know. But as you get older, you start to like realize like you never had family dinners, and my mom didn't really say I love you a lot or really ever until I kind of started getting into psychedelics and started saying it to her. So there was an emotional piece that was kind of um, being very just dysregulated overall, not getting the normal stimulation from family time. And then like my older cousins like always kind of trying to like make me tougher, so there was like an armor being built up there from an emotional aspect that kind of bled out later down in my life. But also simultaneously, I think I was kind of born with a little bit more of a toxic burden on a physical front. I had probably 12 different ear surgeries. You know, I had pneumonia one time, I had a hernia. Few of my, I would have weird funguses and athlete's foot. Like it just seemed like if something was floating around, like I would catch it. You know, a couple of my friends legitimately used to call me Bubble Boy, like from the, and it was like kind of a joke back then because I like played sports and was overall kind of fine. But you know, looking back on that, like my mom had to use special like laundry soap for all of my clothes and my sheets. And this was like before, like, you know, you could go pick up non-toxic shit like everywhere. Like my mom had to go like soul searching for like the fragrance free Tide or what, I don't know, I can't remember what she was using, Arm and Hammer, like without the more of the chemicals in it, because I would react to it. So I'd have all these different issues. And I did have about like 7 or 8 mercury fillings that were extracted improperly. And now I do kind of know that some of the most severe cases as far as health goes are improper mercury extractions, in my opinion. Actually, if you can't get those done by like a super high level biomimetic or biological dentist, I would actually advise people to leave that filling in, because the drilling itself will actually cause a very acute mercury exposure. And so kind of as I went into college, I was drinking a lot. That kind of came with just the environment of growing up in Flint. And I seemed pretty decent, right? I was on the dean's list all the time. I would work out, but I was like drinking heavily. And then I started growing cannabis after college. And that's where it kind of like escalated into a lot of other drugs. And I used to have a lot of, you know, self-will. Even though I partied a lot, I would hit the gym a lot, I would read and things like that. So I wasn't just like a total addict, but I do think that my neuroinflammation gradually got worse and worse and worse, whether that was from the mercury or other toxins, you know, smoking a lot of weed, maybe cadmium. I think the toxic burden started to build. And that's where I kind of lost my grip around like partying harder with like drugs. So I would be taking like handfuls of Vicodin, a couple Adderall with it, drinking a fit, you know, smoking dabs and weed. I'd be on like 4 or 5 different drugs, like on random nights, because I wasn't actually going to work. I was working for myself. I was growing cannabis. And so that led for a while. And so, you know, I always thought it was super just like emotional, like trauma response. Like when I was partying like that, I just thought it was like my upbringing. But the more I've healed on the physical front, I realized I think it was a little bit of a mixture of both the no father, the lack of emotions in childhood, but also on the physical front, where the heavy metals played a role and the neurochemistry. And maybe I'm reaching for something because I just didn't feel good in my body, you know, trauma aside, I just didn't feel good because of all the toxins that I had. So I would reach for the alcohol or the cannabis or whatever. So I think it's a mixed bag when it comes to healing. And that's where there's like 2 separate worlds. And I feel like people need to kind of bring it into both. There's like you know, I was in the yoga. My wife teaches yoga, or well, now she's a stay-at-home mom, but taught yoga forever. So I would just be doing yoga 4 or 5 times a week, some weeks, and really into that community and psychedelics. And I think that a lot of the people in that crowd are too focused on just like trauma and emotional work, and they don't really got their diet dialed in. They don't know that they have nutrient deficiencies and toxicity very well. And then there's also like some camps of even the mineral balancing space that we're kind of in, who really just think that like you get rid of every heavy metal and you don't really need any kind of emotional work as well, right? And it's kind of together. And I lean a little bit more towards the mineral balancing space now, because I do think it's easier to get through your emotions and work through things if you're not toxic. So that kind of piece helps. But also, you know, I did a lot of psychedelic work. So really, before we get into mineral balancing, as I left Michigan, I was like, okay, I'm going to move to Tampa. I'm going to move to Florida and get sober. Basically, I was like, I'm going to quit like smoking and I'm quit drinking. And I drink like here and there and smoke very rarely. And I started to really realize like how bad like my short-term memory was and like my energy level. So like after I came off all the partying, I was like, wow, I actually feel like shit. And then I moved into a house with mold, like about a year. Like we had an apartment for a year, then we went to rent a little bit of an older house, and Florida's just riddled with mold. And I just collapsed. Like I couldn't, I was vegan, I was living in mold, I was super toxic. Like I was trying things, trying to be healthier, but I was not doing the right stuff. So then from there, I got diagnosed with Lyme and Epstein-Barr and Babesia, and seen Dr. Minkoff, who was a pretty prestigious Lyme doctor. And it was like a $20,000 program. And he's a very smart guy. And he claims like my Lyme was gone, but I still felt awful even after that. So that like was not fun because now I had to put all that shit on a credit card. And so like now I'm paying payments. I'm paying like $800 a month. You know, I got all my cavitations removed and a tooth extracted that was dead, and you know, did all the biohacks and a million supplementations until I got around to mineral balancing and you know, Kambo and psychedelics and all that.
Wow. Yeah. Very similar. It's so funny, the similarities. I also was kind of like, I'm ready to leave this lifestyle. I don't want to drink and party anymore. I need a reason to change, hoping it was going to be like a job, a new partner or something like that. And then I got hepatitis A and then was exposed to mold for a year. So it was like, really wasn't what I was expecting to happen. Right when I felt like I really wanted to start taking care of myself. So yeah, so funny. And then, so you do the Lyme treatment, you still feel like crap. Are you still living in mold at that time, or had you moved out of mold?
So I realized that I had a mold issue before I did the Lyme treatment. So we moved out the mold place, threw away like everything we owned. We literally were living with a friend for like 3 months, like on a blow up mattress. It was wild. Like I threw away like all my clothes and books, like anything that they said would take mold with me. I was just like, fuck it, I feel so bad. And my wife, it was a little traumatic for her, but she actually started to feel kind of gradually got worse. Like it hit me right in the beginning. And then the longer we lived there, she started having more symptoms as well. So she kind of got on board with like, let's just get rid of all this stuff and we'll build back from nothing because like I don't feel that well either. And so that kind of helped. And that's where it kind of clicked because I was seeing doctors already, like random functional doctors, just surface level, got diagnosed with adrenal fatigue and different, you know, HPA axis dysfunction and things like that.
Yeah.
But then she
All,
started,
all the things. Yeah,
yeah,
everything.
they slap a label on all of it, and you know, I hate
Yeah.
diagnoses really, but so she started to be more on board because she started to feel like crap too, even though she was still pretty functional. She knew she had some brain fog and inflammation that was abnormal. And so we were just, you know, we moved out of the mold and I had bought a sauna and I had a few biohacks and was taking a bunch of supplements for mold and binders. And I could tell that I still felt like crap. So that's when finally she was like, all right, you need to go like see somebody. And Dr. Minkoff was just like the number one doctor that I could think of around this area. And that didn't really work either. And so then I was just kind of stuck, kind of just fiddling around by myself because now I'm like losing trust for doctors because the most prestigious doctor in all of functional medicine couldn't even get me healthy. And but I always did believe in myself. And I never really attached to that Lyme diagnosis. I felt like it was deeper. And I had actually asked every single one of my functional practitioners if they thought that it could be mercury poisoning or some kind of heavy metal poisoning, because I actually did live in Flint as well. I forgot to bring this up when the lead crisis was going on.
Yeah.
I never really drank the water because as soon as they switched over to the Flint River source, I mean, I just grew up there. That Flint River is like brown. There's like dead cars in there, probably dead bodies. I was just like, I don't even know. This seems crazy. But I didn't, you know, realize at the time, like I probably should have had a really nice shower filter. And so I think I did probably breathe in quite a bit by just doing like showers and stuff like that. And so, you know, I was kind of questioning because I had seen the effects of the lead on the children in Flint. Like they were doing like open, like there would be like a lot of musicians who would come in, like high level A-list celebrities, and do like free shows. And in between the musicians performing, there would be like kids on stage talking about like who were like 4 years old, were like, I just get mad at everything. I never used to be angry. And it was pretty sad. They were only like 4 years old, and they were recognizing a shift in their behavior, their aggressiveness, their learning, their ability to want to learn anything. So I kind of knew that kind of opened my eyes in general to like heavy metal toxicity. And so I was asking all of my practitioners if they thought that it could be anything like that. And they kind of just always like shoved it away. And so, it wasn't until I found mineral balancing where I really got to the root of that. Psychedelic ceremonies helped me get to more of the father piece and the emotional piece. Although it didn't really bring back my energy till I detoxed. But yeah, so I utilized Kambo, lots of mushrooms, some microdoses, and the mineral balancing to kind of get where I'm at today.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how the culture changed. Like, I did a master's program in functional medicine, and it was all about like biochemistry, mitochondria, nutrition. And then when I graduated, I was exposed to mold, and the sickest I had ever been. And the Instagram culture was more like mold detox, shoemaker protocols, Lyme, everything is this. But even in my master's program, we still learned, we had a whole class about metals and chemicals. And so it was on the radar, but it was almost like no one in the space was really going deep into it. I know Dr. Klinghardt at the time he had like molds was part of his, step by step, but he was so much more of a Lyme doctor, parasites, really mold, focusing on those pathogens and short-term heavy metals. So it was kind of like, oh, I did a 3-month heavy metal detox, or like medical medium, like drink your heavy metal detox smoothie. That's all you need, as opposed to the ionic mimicry, theories and things that mineral balancing really discusses is you have to replenish these things. It's not about binding. It's not about chelating. And so many people I'm sure you've met have just gotten so much worse with some of those protocols, that we really have to go back to the foundations of nutrition and like the building blocks. And it seems so simple, now that we think about it. It's not sexy, it's not fancy. You don't get to buy a bunch of really cool supplements. It's just taking B vitamins and minerals. It's so simple.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I couldn't even believe that I hadn't heard of the program sooner. And, it's funny, the biohacking, like functional health space, has become this kind of like almost gimmicky in a sense. Although I still do utilize some of these products, I try new things. I get sent stuff for my podcast. Like as long as I don't think that it's like going to have extra minerals in it that are going to affect my program, I will try quite a few of them. And we're utilizing some of those kind of compounds in Valence as well to kind of stack. But like they're always trying to like sell you the newest like methylene blue or mitochondrial like a supplement. But the problem is that these minerals as metal ions actually run the mitochondria quite a bit. The manganese is really needed for the mitochondria, like superoxide dismutase, manganese dependent superoxide dismutase. Also phosphorus, along with calcium, involved in mitochondrial linked gene expression and energy metabolism. There's a few, like 3 different calcium dependent enzymes in the mitochondria that affect ATP. They also affect complex 5 in the electron transport chain. And in my opinion, everyone's calcium deficient. We can get into a whole because I think calcium's been demonized, wrongfully so.
Agreed.
Wrongfully so. And I could talk about forever about that. But so they're overlooking the actual compounds, at a biochemical level that we've had in our system for millennia, and saying this urolithin A product is what you need.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
doesn't it make more sense that you're probably B vitamin deficient, vitamin C deficient, and mineral deficient, and not methylene blue deficient? Like
Exactly.
I like methylene blue. I think it's cool. I use it sometimes. But it's like that's not the cure all. That's not what your body's missing. It's way more logical to think that you're zinc deficient than methylene blue deficient.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's why I think people either love it or they maybe resist it, because they're like, that's too simple, I can't just be deficient in these things. That can't be the only answer. And plus good marketing, with these new things, it's, you get ads for it. You're never going to see an ad for calcium. maybe maybe BioOptimizer's magnesium, but a lot less than some of these super fancy products. And I resisted that too when I first got sick. I remember doing my BioRes scan, and it was like, you need B vitamins, you need vitamin C, you need some garlic, probably for like sulfur. And I had candida overgrowth and mold. And I was like, this is boring. I want to do the mold detox. I want to do the Lyme protocol.
Yeah, and Lyme is interesting because I think that almost every functional practitioner is overlooking manganese when it comes to Lyme. And I actually have this theory that I think glyphosate is actually causing the rise in Lyme. So we actually started using heavy amounts of glyphosate around 1996. And from 2004 to 2008, Lyme disease was doubling. So I think there's a direct connection with it because glyphosate actually can impair manganese and how it's excreted through the bile system. And it will actually cause symptoms of deficiency and excess at the same time. And that manganese can be caught, that improper manganese that can't be excreted will end up in the brainstem and the vagus nerve. So now when we look at Lyme disease, it's generally causing nervous system distress and neurological issues, right? Same as manganese. And there's clear studies, they've been out forever, that show that Borrelia itself thrives in a manganese-rich environment. So it will actually drop off iron and use manganese to evade the immune system when you're actually trying to kill it off with herbal products and ozone and different things like that. And so when you're focusing on a Lyme treatment specifically, and you have no idea of the manganese levels, if there's excess manganese, or not trying to detox it in any specific way, then I think you're kind of missing the mark. And that's kind of sucks because I do think a lot of the Lyme community, they do a lot of herbal protocols and they do a lot of, all the things I did with Minkoff IVs and different things. And they put Lyme into remission, but they actually never get optimal. Like a lot of them just kind of get the toxicity low enough to kind of, still be functional, still get some things done, but they're not really like living to the fullest, in my opinion. And so you see a lot of people who are like, oh, my Lyme was in remission for 3 years and so activated it, or, this stressful event reactivated my Lyme or mold. And so that tells you right there that their terrain really hasn't truly eliminated Lyme, or it can't effectively take off Lyme. And I believe it's because manganese itself is still inside of the brainstem or in certain places where it's not supposed to be in different like oxidation rates and oxidation states. And so this is kind of confusing because I'm not here to like demonize manganese. It's actually very, very important. It actually, like I told you, runs some of the mitochondrial enzymes, manganese superoxide dismutase. There's also manganese needed to convert ammonia into urea. It helps with the metabolism of amino acids, cholesterol, carbohydrates. It's actually even needed in gluconeogenesis. So for ketogenic people, manganese is actually essential as well. I wouldn't just run and take manganese. I would use a hair test, but it actually helps us metabolize different energy substrates or go into gluconeogenesis and just different like glutamate levels in the brain and things like that. So I'm not here to like just demonize manganese, but people have to realize like the same with copper, the same with iron, you can have simultaneously excess and deficiency occurring at the same exact time. You could actually have a need to supplement a certain mineral like manganese or copper in a bioavailable form to be utilized by the body in that moment to balance out the whole system. And then when the body feels necessary, it will remove the excess. You don't really get to control that. Like, in our space, we kind of just give the nutrients the body, give the nutrients that the body wants. It shifts around and then it kind of does its thing. It may focus on aluminum for a while. It may go to nickel. But then over time, you'll start to have those manganese dumps or those copper dumps as the body feels like it's got more energy back. So people don't realize that, there are beneficial minerals and it's hard for them to wrap their mind around that you tell them that they have copper toxicity or manganese toxicity, but also you're giving them those nutrients at the same time. So people need to try to understand that you can have deficiency and excess coexisting right at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so are you saying that glyphosate is causing excess manganese in this like biounavailable form, and then the Lyme is feeding off of that?
I think the Lyme's using it to actually evade the immune system. So there's no like clear studies on this, but the dates are eerily similar, where in
Yeah.
1996 we're starting to use these foreign compounds that we've never used in our food system. There's data showing that it impairs how we excrete manganese, and it even says that that excess manganese will build up directly in the brainstem and in the vagus nerve, which is, I think, two of the most common issues with Lyme. And there's, different camps with Lyme. It's potentially a bioweapon. It's potentially been tweaked with. If you've ever read Krista Newby's book, Bitten, some evidence there. But also, I've had doctors on my show who say Borrelia has been around forever, right?
Yeah.
Should be some kind of discussion around why aren't we able to get rid of Lyme? Why is it that hard? Like it seems to be one of the hardest things to get rid of, and it comes with Epstein-Barr and Babesia and all these co-infections and things like that. And I think manganese is just being overlooked. Your average practitioner who may even be conscious about heavy metals or something like that, they're actually never really checking for manganese. They're actually just trying to, let's get the mercury out. And potentially a good heavy metal detox outside of mineral balancing. I don't really like them, but I always say maybe you just detox enough metals and then excess copper goes away or excess manganese goes away because the body gets energy. I'm not going to discredit that. They just don't have any data because they don't do the hair testing. And I'm not 100% sure about it either. I think that potentially the manganese is still there. I would need to see some data from somebody who's doing some kind of chelation or some kind of other protocol and see their hair test and see if they ever do actually release any of those like toxic forms of manganese.
Yeah. And I think I kind of have a theory about glyphosate with the increase in connective tissue disorders as well, because glyphosate can disrupt how we repair our connective tissue. So the heavy metals, the glyphosate, there's a few other factors that, because those are skyrocketing too, along with mast cell activation, all of these things kind of overlap with each other with heavy toxicity, the nervous system dysregulation, severe deficiencies. And that's why I think mineral balancing is so effective at any type of illness, diagnosis, pathogen, because you're really allowing the body to have what it needs to handle the overgrowth, to really repair that terrain, to have the building blocks for your nervous system to communicate. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, there's clear studies too that show that Roundup, glyphosate, whatever you want to call it, does make the body absorb aluminum and arsenic at a higher rate as well. And the thing we know about heavy metals, just in general, is they actually accumulate. Obviously, you probably already had someone talk about this, Clark, maybe, where, when you have the subtle deficiencies or imbalances, then you accumulate more of the heavy metal that's introduced through the food system or wherever you get exposure from. But then once the heavy metals are there, depending on which heavy metal and where it's placed, they also can kind of make the body accumulate even more. So it's like a double-edged sword. It's like once you have some, like cadmium, for instance, can start to shut down some of your detox enzymes within your liver and kidneys if it builds up there. And so then now that those enzymes are dysregulated, then once the heavy metals come in through the food sources or through air pollution, you're going to bioaccumulate even more of that because the original heavy metal load has now shut down the detox pathways or the enzymes that regulate those. Also, the blood-brain barrier, there's some links there. Minerals kind of control the blood-brain barrier. So if you do start to accumulate heavy metals that affect the blood-brain barrier, now you have a leaky brain. And so now you're even bioaccumulating even more heavy metals than you would had you not had that original exposure. So it's crazy double-edged sword of poor farming practices, poor nutrient density, poor diets in general. And then once you do start to have a little bit of a heavy metal load, it slowly starts to increase upon itself because they shut down the different enzymes, open up the gut barrier, open up the leaky brain. And so it's like a cascading effect.
Yep, exactly. And, previously our heavy metal detoxes like the chelation, these have a time and a place, I think. But without that replenishing piece of the minerals, I don't think that they're as effective and can also really harm people too. So let's go back to calcium, because I love calcium. I think calcium's
I
tied
post
with
as much as I can about calcium.
you what?
I post on my Instagram like calcium maxing all the time because everyone recognizes it.
Yeah, so I'm working on a post now about the calcium shell and its overlap with like the cell danger response, and how that when we go into cell danger response, our calcium metabolism shifts to start that, you know, hardening process. Tell us a little bit about like what does calcium do besides just keep our bones and teeth strong?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. I think everyone's calcium deficient. I think you need to be taking a Cal Mag supplement to replace it. I think that those two are synergistic, and that's where people go wrong. They just think like, older people will just take calcium like for their bones or whatever, and that's a big part of it. But calcium is the most abundant mineral in the entire body, and also lead. People know that lead substitutes for calcium, but also cadmium and I believe aluminum. So you have three different metals that most of us all have that are competing with absorption. And it's also the most abundant mineral in the body. So yes, you always have an excess storage of calcium. It's always going to be there. You have bones and teeth, but you don't want your body to be pulling from those reserves at all times just to do the other functions that calcium's needed for in the body, because it will. And that's why calcium kind of gets a bad rap. And, there's a million studies that show that calcification causes a lot of issues. No argument there. There's a Goldilocks window of where we need calcium. Too low is really bad, and too high in the soft tissues is also bad. And it's not necessarily just high calcium, though, that causes the calcification, which is like basically calcium displaced in the soft tissues, causes a numerous amount of issues around the body, lots of diseases. It's not good. But also you need magnesium in the right ratio, in the right dose to actually transport calcium across the cell. And we've kind of even hacked this a little bit with the valence subs we can get into a little bit later. But also sodium and potassium are very effective when they're in the right ranges, the ideal levels and ratios to one another, to keep calcium and magnesium in an ionic solution. So that's how the body actually absorbs calcium and magnesium. So when you have dysregulated sodium and potassium levels, which is every single client, they're basically in like basic burnout or sympathetic dominance, very low. Now you start to see a buildup of calcium. And then also the kidneys do filter out calcium and excrete it through the urine in excess. And most everybody has some kind of kidney stress or congestion as well. And that's why we're always supporting the kidneys on the program. So this is how you start to realize that just calcium supplementation by itself, without working through the other minerals on the hair test, potentially that does lead to calcification. But when you are working in mineral balancing, you're starting to make the body more effective at calcium utilization. And that's why we see calcium shells go down with calcium supplementation, because the heavy metals will also cause calcification. Fluoride also causes calcification. So there's a lot of different things that we have to remove the interference. We have to get the adrenals back working as the sodium level, got to get the cortisol into a good response with the potassium, and then also the ratio between those. So there's a lot going on just from the calcification standpoint. And just because the white papers say that calcification is bad doesn't mean that we don't need calcium when it's the most abundant mineral in the entire body. You can find a study for everything in the world that you want, but where is the data showing it? We give everybody vitamin D, we give everybody calcium, we get lower readings of calcium over time, and they come out of that shell as long as they stick with the program, do the enemas, and do everything. So we basically have tons of data that shows that calcium supplements aren't causing the calcium shell or the calcification, but you have to be working with the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, because calcium is regulated by so many other things. Like if you're just taking calcium by itself, but you've got all these other issues with absorption and the hormones that regulate calcium in the blood and in the bone, and you're super stressed out and you're actively in trauma responses, all of that's going to affect where calcium goes. So it's not the calcification like, oh no, it's calcium's fault, because I think we have our bones with mostly calcium for a reason, to prevent us from running out, because we would die instantly, right? So it's not that calcification's fault. It's why would my body be doing this? What purpose does it serve? And that's also why I like the explanation of a calcium shell, because then okay, it's actually my responsibility to work on my nervous system, my emotional health, my thought process, my mindset. And that's why all of these things go together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll dive into, back to your original question. I was doing a Donald Trump weave.
the weave.
But I wanted to get into the calcification part because that's
Yeah.
where, the Morley Robbinses of the world and even Matt Blackburn are big into calcification, although I've changed his mind on that a little bit.
Okay.
They're just like the white papers really show calcification. So I wanted to kind of hammer that home, that the minerals work in a system. And when all of the minerals start to get into more normal ranges, you actually start to absorb and utilize other minerals better. But that being said, calcium has probably one of the most effective mechanisms at kind of regulating the nervous system. It's needed for nerve transmission. It enables effective communication between nerve cells, helps regulate muscle contractions, relaxation of the muscles as well. And it even helps maintain a steady heartbeat. And that's all stemming down, most of it, from the basically the nervous system regulated. There's a few different enzymes, synaptogens, which is calcium binding proteins that are really critical for the release of neurotransmitters. Calcineurin is a phosphate dependent protein that really helps for the neurons. So it helps synaptic plasticity, regulates memory, learning. Calcium is needed for blood clotting and preventing excess blood loss when you're healing. It supports the heart, muscle function, and it actually even helps with your acid alkaline base in your stomach. So people actually have this argument about, like, should we be acidic and be carnivore? Should we be alkaline and be vegan? And I've done them both. And, the truth's always somewhere in the middle, but you have actual minerals that can help regulate your gut function. And then calcium is also needed for the tight junctions that help with leaky gut. So everybody's actually on some kind of gut reset and gut protocol, but I've never seen anything as more effective as just mineral balancing, specifically because the heavy metals will displace the minerals that are needed for your tight junctions and your gut function. And so when you use the minerals to push those out, I know you probably notice you start to have way less food allergies. People do get a little bloated sometimes, but then it goes away, start to regulate the hormones. I mean, I just could only digest like 4 foods before I started mineral balancing, and now I can eat like everything. And I think that's due to the minerals closing up the tight junctions. Another big one is insulin. Calcium, heavy metals themselves will actually displace minerals in your pancreas, and they can dysregulate insulin. People are always trying to do like their funky CGMs. I always make fun of CGMs. It's like, you should not be reacting to a green bean or whatever it is. That's like skewing your continuous glucose monitor. It's bizarre. You are having improper insulin signals to random foods due to maybe leaky gut or, some kind of reaction from the immune system. But calcium actually is needed to elicit a proper insulin signal. And then magnesium in the right ratio to the calcium is needed so that the blood sugar doesn't get too low. And it's not that hard to look back before we were super toxic, maybe even in just like in the 50s, where people would just like eat a croissant for breakfast and drink a coffee, and like they didn't have anxiety and low blood sugar and mood swings. Like it just didn't exist. They were more mineral rich and more robust. They were born at a different time where, cadmium and arsenic also affect blood sugar. Zinc is needed for insulin function as well. There's some other ones, chromium, that really come into play as well. But calcium's a big one. And so people are actually out here taking isolated magnesium supplements, and I'm not knocking you because that was me for a million years too, mega dosing it and all different forms and, just being crazy. Well, that actually is antagonistic to aldosterone. So that's actually going to mess with your sodium levels, but also skew the calcium and magnesium ratio. And so when that ratio is skewed, it starts to be really low because the magnesium is going to keep going higher over time, and the calcium is either going to stay the same or start to not be utilized. And so that's when you're going to get that low blood sugar. We know that when people have a low cal-mag ratio, they have more intolerances to simple sugars and sweets, and even sometimes complex carbs. Some people are really, really just sensitive to even like a normal healthy carb. And so calcium plays so many roles in the body, runs 3 different mitochondrial enzymes, all needed for energy function, helps with that electron transport chain. I mean, I cannot speak highly enough about calcium. It's probably like my favorite supplement.
Yeah, same. I was in such a massive calcium shell that like when I first started taking even just Paramin, it made such a huge difference with how stressed I felt. I God only knows how long I was in that calcium shell, but tell us about the Valence CalMag Fusion supplement, because I was looking for something like this for years. And I mean, I feel like this is a standalone supplement, even if you're not doing mineral balancing. Like I have my parents on it, just like, take this, guys, just take it every day.
Yeah, I agree. I had Clark on my show trying to just convert people, because I have a lot of people listen to my show who don't do mineral balancing, just trying to kind of
Yeah.
persuade them to like, you can just switch to a CalMag supplement. It doesn't have to be Valence. I'm not biased towards just one supplement. Although I do think we have the most unique, complex, best CalMag supplement on the entire market. I haven't even come across, I mean, we did tons of research, like why isn't anyone using the K2 for the calcium utilization? Which is funny, like some hair tissue mineral analysis practitioners will just give you like high dose K2 if you're in a calcium shell, and that works. But it still is critical.
That's what I was doing.
Yeah, that's not going to work in a standalone, but it is a great addition to the CalMag supplement, right? And so we got into mineral orotates a little bit through actually Dr. Group, which I think is a very smart individual. If you guys never seen any of him on a podcast, he's into urine therapy and all kinds of wild stuff, but he's really into minerals. I wish he would use more like HTMA, but like his mineral supplements are like top tier as far as like forms and what he uses. Sometimes I try just some of his stuff to see, like he has this cuprous nicotinic acid, which is like a copper 1 supplement that we want to include later in Valence too. So he's a really smart guy, but it stems down. Dr. Group said, there was this German physician. So we read his book. His name was Dr. Hans Napier. And so he actually studied around the time that Dr. Paul Eck did, but they didn't have podcasts and easy virtuals but from the 60s to the 90s. But he was actually started to realize that a lot of the mineral chelates, so the chelate that the mineral is attached to in the supplement form, weren't actually penetrating the mitochondria, getting into the cell of his sicker patients. So he would get, his normal patients who were just a little sick seemed to do okay, but he couldn't get, the sicker patients, he couldn't get them well. And he started to realize that some minerals, they kind of repel on the cell. So they actually have, it's like kind of like a magnet. So they have the same charge. So he wasn't actually penetrating through the cell membrane and getting into the mitochondria where you actually need certain minerals like calcium. And so he created calcium orotate, which I think is the most potent standalone supplement. I was taking that. I was making my own CalMag similar to what we created. Like before, I was like mixing powders together just to try it. Ours is still better than what I was doing because we have multiple forms of everything. But that actual orotic acid holds an opposite charge. So it actually will deliver through the cell membrane and get that calcium into the mitochondria where it's actually needed. And so that's the beauty. It uses simple diffusion and that opposite charge to penetrate through. And that's why people are getting these detox reactions off of extremely low doses. And that's another thing that the mineral balancing space has to let go of a little bit if they're going to switch from whatever products they're using to I mean, it can be Endomed, it can be whatever they're using. If they're going to come to Valence, you have to realize we have sought out the most bioavailable, minerals that you can find. And so you have to start thinking about bioavailability over absorption. And so, or over dosage, I should say, because some people want to come into it like, I need X amount of magnesium a day or calcium. And you're not going to feel good on Valence, period. That CalMag Fusion is just too strong. So you have to just take what you can tolerate and slowly build up over time, because the aluminum dumps and the cadmium movement from CalMag Fusion is unlike anything that I've ever seen. And that's because even some of the mineral chelates that we use, like magnesium aspartate, will actually help move calcium across the cell as well. And then you have calcium aspartate that will actually go into the extracellular matrix, because you have some calcium intracellularly, some extracellularly. So we're like targeting all these pathways from the mineral chelate standpoint. And that's like the discussion as well. Like a lot of mineral balancing practitioners who just always use these old school supplements were kind of under the impression that mineral chelates don't matter. And forms do really matter. Whether it's B vitamin forms or mineral chelates, you can make a much more potent supplement. Yeah, they're a little bit more pricey, but they also have an absorption rate that are way more effective. I get like 10x results of what I used to get at much lower doses, because people cannot handle that much CalMag fusion in the beginning. But at least we're getting things moving around in the early stages, because as you know, sometimes it'll take a client 2, 3, 4 retests to start getting some metal eliminations. And now I'm getting them basically on every first retest, even if it's a kind of a small amount, you're seeing stuff move around. And so has the like multiple different forms of calcium, multiple different forms of magnesium, similar to like a magnesium breakthrough. So a lot of inspiration from Bioptimizers as well. Love those guys. Like really hammering home the different mineral chelates and how they affect different systems in the body. So we took a lot of that. If you look at even our NRK up, our zinc, everything's using multiple forms, and I think they're effective that way. And the CalMag also has the K2. We actually just added in, this actually isn't available yet. It's at the warehouse, but we have to sell through the other version. We actually just added in choline stabilized orthosilic acid, which is orthosilic acid is what's found in like Fiji water and different waters around the world. But there's some really good research that also grabs aluminum and transports it out of the system as well. And so we actually added that into the new CalMag that'll be out. And so I think it's very unique. I think it's great. As far as mineral balancing, I haven't seen any other supplement that's been effective, not even the other Valence supplements.
Yeah, it's the one that I was just like, this is my new favorite. I've especially adding the K, adding the boron, the silica, the taurine. It was just like, this is a perfect supplement.
Yeah.
The other
I
one
forgot about the boron. The
yeah.
we used is a really cool
You
form
forgot.
that no one's really using too. It's because it's going to say calcium fructoborate, which is actually this very natural boron that it's a little bit more expensive, but we figured it was still, the research on it was really well. We could have used a cheaper boron, but that seemed to be the most effective. Once we added that in with the other mineral chelates, I really think it's top tier, and it's changing mineral balancing for the better.
Yeah. The other one I absolutely love is the zinc. Those forms of zinc it's also the orotates in there, and NAK up, just wildly surpasses Linkamin for moving that sodium to potassium ratio. Let me think. And then I love in the BioFlow. What was that?
NAK up is so good that we sell way more zinc now because the ratio is flipping so fast. In the beginning, when we first came out with everything, NAK up was like our best seller, and now we sell way more zinc. And that to me just proves that the NAK up is working faster than the Limcomin, because they'll take it for 1 to 2 retests and then be on zinc for a long time. So it's definitely very, very effective.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit why you would not want that low NA to K ratio, like why it's so important to get out of that.
Yeah. So, the NAK ratio is potentially the most important functional diagnostic test measurement of all functional medicine. I really believe that. It's really, we call it the vitality ratio for a reason, but you have to realize it's also, these are called your electrolytes. So they actually determine the electrical potential of the cell. So now they're not involved in specific mineral dependent enzymes, but they are so important. You want everyone's talking about the body electric. You can do all the grounding you want. If you have a terrible NAK ratio, your cells are not electrically charged in the manner that they should be. You can do all the PMF you want. It's just not happening. So if it's too high, it's not good. I'd rather see it a little high than a little low, but small variations from the ideal level. And I actually want to talk about this for a little bit. No one talks about, but I don't trust a lot of new testing measurements. a LIGO scan and stuff like that. Although I think there's cool data to be extracted from that. But these testing measurements are saying what they're calling a healthy population in the last 10 years, which I feel like is not good.
Yeah,
Dr. Paul
doesn't exist.
was literally working in the 60s and all through the 70s, 80s, and then passed away in the 90s. And he also doesn't use reference ranges. So like a small variation from Dr. Pollack's ideal levels or the ratio levels actually means a lot to a practitioner, not to the naked eye. It kind of looks like, oh, I'm doing kind of good. But even that NAK ratio, a little bit low, can tell us a lot. And if it starts to get too low, you're actually going to start to get into a point where if it's bad enough, people, Dr. Pollack would call it like decreased awareness of like daily life. But on like a physical level, you're going to have kidney stress, liver stress. You're going to have, lots of allergies, in my opinion, maybe to foods, maybe to molds, maybe to, environment. People think that they're like allergic to pollen season every year. I think that's kind of like just a poor terrain. Because you've been living there your whole life, and all of a sudden you have like seasonal allergies and stuff. It's kind of wild what we kind of adapt to and just accept. But you don't want that sodium potassium ratio to be low, because it's going to impair the detox capabilities, because your electrolytes are malfunctioning and so the cell is not functioning correctly. And so we use copper and manganese as the sodium synergist in that NAK up to help raise sodium and lower potassium. And so that's what we kind of get into the weeds with mineral balancing. Like, I don't actually give people sodium to raise sodium. We use different minerals to do that. Or if you had a high NAK ratio, we would give the Zinc Matrix Pro, because zinc is needed to lower sodium and raise potassium. So it gets a little bit into the weeds, but you don't want the variation of your NAK ratio to be too high or too low. If it gets a little high, you start to get into like inflammatory responses, overactivation of the adrenals, which is not good. It's going to cause some kidney stress as well if it gets too high. And quite personally, if I see an NAK ratio above 8, I generally start to say that they have some kind of autoimmune condition, whether it's diagnosed or not, because the inflammation is just too high. So if the inflammation's high enough, over above 8, I would say you're reacting somehow, some way to something in the immune system, even if you only perceive it as fatigue or brain fog, and you may not have gotten like a specific diagnosis. You have an immune dysregulation if it's that high, because inflammation's blocking something.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Mine's consistently high, and it was very high when I started, and I had mast cells. So definitely correlates. One more thing I wanted to one more mineral, I should say, I wanted to talk about before we get into psychedelics is the lithium supplement. So, lithium, the form that you're using, the orotate and I believe aspartate in this one as well, how does that compare to the medication lithium? And could someone do both at the same time? I know, that's getting into, of course, disclaimer, not medical advice, but how do they differ if you wanted to, let's say, you have a family member on lithium and they wanted to taper off with their doctor?
Yeah. So there's the medical lithium, there's normal lithium orotate, and then there's lethos, all three very different. The pharmaceutical version that you would get from your doctor is generally a pretty high dose. If I'm not mistaken, it may be even like 20 to 30, 40 milligrams sometimes. I can't remember the exact pharmaceutical dose, but
it can get into like 450,
yeah,
600.
it might even get even higher than that. It gets kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But they're also not using lithium orotate. So I think the absorption is
Right.
a little bit lower than an orotate, but still the dosage is just crazy. Because high doses of lithium, and I see this on people specifically on Oligo scans. Sometimes you see it on a hair test as well. That if they're taking like even 5 milligrams a day, they have high lithium on an Oligo scan. The hair test starts to shoot up. And I'm not necessarily worried about a little bit of a higher lithium, but what it does do is it has the ability to turn into like sodium and potassium in the body. So now you want to be making sure that you're not skewing that sodium potassium ratio by taking the lithium just because the white papers on lithium look good. So that's the other issue. And so most lithium supplements, the orotates on the market, are around 5 milligrams, because that's pretty standard in the scientific data. And we have to realize that studies are generally short term. So you give somebody, they can't be conducted for multiple years. It just costs too much money. So they generally run a study. They're giving people 5 milligrams a day. Lithium has a nice little mood boost to it. Their depression goes away a little bit. But what happens when they take that lithium for 2, 3, 4 years without understanding what it's doing to their sodium and potassium ratio? Well, now the lithium's starting to cause other problems in the system because they're not doing any testing revolved around it. So that's the issue with high dosing.
Well, lithium medication, you have to get your blood drawn because it can get toxic if your body's not utilizing it. So it's like, yeah, every month at least. I've known people who have had like kidney failure from taking lithium. Yeah, you have to really monitor. There's a couple psych meds you really have to monitor.
Yeah, the dosage just in the pharmaceuticals in general, even on the lower end, it seems a crazy high to me. And I think that part of the issue is just they're going to start skewing other minerals because they work in a system. And so ours is very, very low dose. And so if you do want to get it up to like around 1 milligram, you can take like 3 a day. But, I like the lower doses in general because lithium is mostly like this. A lot of good studies are just like people drinking lithium from drinking water had higher increased vitality. They had better moods. They were healthier. And I think it's kind of supposed to be in that manner. I think we're going to bump it up to 500 from 300. We're talking micrograms here though. So, we might bump it up to like 0.5 milligram next time around. We're still tweaking things and playing with things, but we do think that it needs to be a little bit of a lower dose. Now you could probably get away with 5-10 milligrams for a period of time if you have that super low sodium to potassium ratio, but without doing the retesting and seeing where that falls, then you can have some issues. Robert Seelig, he'll go as high as 30 milligrams, but he's paying attention to the ratio at all times. And so it can be effective for your mood. It helps both of the hemispheres of the brain connect better, helps your thinking, just mood enhancement overall. So that can be really good because people on a mineral balancing program, or even when they come to you, they get little bouts of depression, and especially when they're moving metals out of the brain. So if we can get them on a proper lithium dose, then that's going to be critical. And then there's also good studies about people with vanadium in their drinking water, really good response with calcium and insulin and a bunch of other things too. And then I do think most people could use a small amount of chromium. So it's like a lithium, vanadium, and chromium. It's like these ultra trace minerals that I think people are lacking a little bit, but even in small doses, when taken daily, do build up and they create a good response over time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen anyone with chromium in a normal level on a hair test, not even once.
Oh, I think that I give everybody like 1 or 2 of those lithium lithos capsules a day. And, we're using very, very bioavailable forms as well. So sometimes it's like, oh, the dosage is a little low. And it's like, you have to get back to that point where the mineral transporters that you use make a lot. You might take 200 to 400 micrograms of some other chromium supplement, but if it's not the same form that's more bioavailable, who knows exactly what the difference is there. So we try to use the most bioavailable forms that we can get so that the dosage doesn't have to be so crazy as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So let's get into psychedelics. So psilocybin, LSD, why Kambo? Because I don't really consider that a psychedelic. Why did you feel called to get into that?
It's not really a psychedelic, so I started my journey with just, honestly, it was weird because like even when I partied all the time, I would read books and stuff. I was kind of very much a functioning addict. Like I so I had money. I sold other drugs, so I always had them. I wasn't like fiending out on the corner. I had a house that I paid off for in Flint. Like I was just kind of not bugging nobody, didn't lose any family members. I was just addicted to shit.
I got master's degrees during that time period of my life.
So it's like, I was very much functioning, doing whatever I needed to do. And I would like listen to podcasts and listen to books. And a buddy of mine put me onto Tim Ferriss. And I think that was actually a really good person for me to kind of get introduced to psychedelics by, because he seemed very level-headed. He didn't seem, at that time, I was not really spiritual, kind of woo-woo at all. And he was very like, here's the, the studies, the statistics, this is what it did for me. Very not like super hippie or anything. So that was good. And his book, Tools of Titans, he had a whole like protocol about microdose. And then there was more research I did around LSD, where it was really, really helpful for Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think LSD kind of gets like thrown to the side because a lot of the hippies want like the most natural substance. But you give me LSD microdoses or mushroom microdoses for the rest of my life, I'm taking LSD no matter what. It's 1,000 times like in a microdose form. I love LSD. That's what I go to more. Every once in a while, I'll take a mushroom cap, but mostly I like the microdose LSD. But, it really helped me like pretty much banish my alcohol cravings almost like overnight just by doing it like two or
Wow.
three times a week. It was crazy. Like I kind of learned that it was like used to be in AA, but they took it out because it was controversial. And I started using it and it was just like, boom, like I didn't care if I really drank, or I would take a microdose before I was meeting up with people and I would have like 2 drinks instead of like 30. And I was like, this is kind of crazy. Like how much it doesn't make me want alcohol at all. And then I got into more of like, getting into the weeds with the take five heroes dose of mushrooms and lay on your couch and listen to the mushroom music. So I started getting into those. Those were life changing. I always say like I became a different person like after I started taking like 5 grams of mushrooms every once in a while and just like kind of sitting with my thoughts, like not distracted, eye mask on, music on, real ceremonial style. And those changed my life from an emotional standpoint, from an addiction standpoint, from working through a lot of my things that I grew up with. Those were a catalyst for sure. But they did not bring back, I used to just basically party all through college and like make the dean's list every semester and work a serving job. So I'm like, how do I like where'd my brain function go? Like it was like I felt like it was like non-existent, even though I was like learning all the time. I would have to like re-listen to podcasts like multiple times sometimes because I couldn't remember the details of it. And sometimes I would read books and kind of like stop and think like I don't remember half the stuff I just read. It was getting very bizarre. And so I had another biohacking buddy. His name's Todd Shipman, really cool guy, really high level biohacker, who started doing a lot of posts about Kambo. And he was talking about how it was good for mold and how it was good for Lyme. And I didn't even really have a Lyme diagnosis at that time, but I knew that I had just kind of moved out of this mold. Actually, I was still living in mold when I did my first session. And so I goes, let me just see if I can find somebody by me who does Kambo, if it's supposed to be good for autoimmune and all these different parasites and stuff. So I found a guy. He drove to me to Tampa from Orlando, and I had an amazing experience with it. It was challenging. I was sweating. You have to puke. You go to the bathroom multiple times, but it's only 20 minutes. That's what people don't realize.
Oh, okay.
Not like this 7 hour like ayahuasca experience.
Okay,
I always
yeah.
tell people like you can do anything for 20 minutes. So the ceremony is longer because you're doing hape, you're doing sananga, the eye drops, and sage. So it's like ceremonial. So the ceremony can be an hour and a half or 2 hours, but you only have the combo on for 20 minutes. And so for those who don't really even know what Kambo is, it is basically like animal based medicine. It should be kind of separated from plant medicines, in my opinion, because it is the secretion of an Amazonian frog, Phylomedusa bicolor. And they don't harm the frogs. I guess some tribes maybe do now that it's kind of blowing up. So there's been some kind of back and forth on how sustainable it is or how well the practices are. But I know the lady personally who harvests my sticks and stuff like that. But you basically burn little gates, you would call them like burn holes basically, but they're just very superficial. It's just taking off the top layer of skin so that once the Kambo secretion is placed on there, it gets into the lymphatic system. And there's crazy amounts of research around the peptides of Kambo. They're actually so good that the pharmaceutical companies have tried to do what they always do, extract them down and like make them in a lab. But for some reason, they can't get them to work. And I have a theory that it's a natural substance that all of the peptides are working synergistically at the same time instead of just trying to isolate the one peptide that's good for your opioid receptors or the one peptide that's good for parasites or that's antimicrobial. I think actually doing the ceremony, all of it working synergistically at the same time, is what gives the benefits. But yeah, there's good data around antimicrobial effects, antiparasitic, depression, fatigue. And there's an energetic aspect of it. We do these, where we were doing these retreats before my wife got pregnant, where it was kind of like yoga, manifestation. I was cooking all the food, but I would do a Kambo ceremony at the end. We did breath work out there. And so a lot of the journaling work would be around whatever they're trying to manifest in their life moving forward. And then they would kind of bring that intention into the Kambo ceremony. And a lot of times we've seen big shifts in people in the days to weeks after they set that intention. Maybe it was just from the whole weekend of intention, but definitely I think Kambo brought an aspect of it, like people who were looking for a house and then they did the Kambo ceremony and they found the house the next day, like after they had been looking. Or one girl had been like saying she was going to move and buy some land and move out of the city for years, and then did that experience and then like pulled the trigger on it. So like whether it's just shifting the neurochemistry so you're just more likely to take action, or if it's just energetically shifting around your aura or your system in a way that makes you more in tune or brings things into your orbit, I'm not sure. So I think there's definitely a physical and a little bit of an energetic component to it, because it is still a natural medicine that they do sing songs around, sing prayer around. It's very, very sacred to them. It's not just this thing that we're kind of using it for as like autoimmune conditions. Although you can just say, hey, I have like some kind of inflammatory autoimmune condition and I just want to see if it helps. You definitely can, but there's been a lot of good responses, and some people have actually analyzed the purge that comes out, and you will see like candida and you will see mold in there, and there's some heavy metals in there. I don't think it's going as deep as mineral balancing from a heavy metal standpoint, but there's definitely some that come out. So people do generally feel a lot better. So it's interesting.
Yeah. So is there that neuroplasticity piece like with psilocybin and LSD with Kambo?
I am not 100% sure, like as far they have different peptides that do work in the brain, especially on the opioid receptors. You can see a lot of downregulation of inflammation and pain receptors. That was one thing that kind of hooked me, because when I had Lyme and had mold, I had so much pain down my spine, like when I toss and turn, when I would sleep. So when I would do Kambo, it would just be gone, like for at least like, a little while, then it would come back. And I do another session. But so it was very interesting, and people do seem to feel very calm, very centered, like they can work more without being kind of like all over the place and being in some kind of like fight or flight reaction. But like with everything, one session doesn't cure everything in your system. You got to periodically do it, come back to it, and it wears off. Just like psychedelics, you kind of have that honeymoon phase after your ceremony for a couple of weeks, and then you go back into your calcium shell and you're kind of like, I'm not 100%. So it's the same. So I didn't find as deep of healing in it, but even at a microdose level where you just do like 1 point, this is more like a practitioner thing, because you got to kind of know how to administer it. But even at microdose levels, I'll get better sleep, better HRV, lower inflammation. So it's definitely very potent. I just think if you're super, super toxic, like I was, you're going to need a more of a long-term approach, like mineral balancing.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of bringing it back to what you said in the beginning, we really need to bridge. And this is what I do, like in my practice, that emotional piece plus the physical piece, because if you're working on one, you're going to need the other eventually, and vice versa. And I see this like with some of the gurus in the nervous system space, some of the gurus in the physical, functional medicine space. All of a sudden they'll be like, hey guys, I'm going to be working on this other thing, just FYI. And you're like, gosh, finally, like, of course you have to eventually come around to both of them. So, and especially with mineral balancing, the retracing process that can bring up the old patterns and the old memories and the old ways of being, we really need those tools and skills to be able to say, oh, I recognize that this is how I felt back then, or that this is bringing this old stuff up in me, and I'm going to choose a new way of sitting with it, or choose a new way of processing it, instead of shutting down the calcium shell, drinking alcohol, whatever your thing was.
Yeah. And on that note, I will say the people who come to me from maybe the psychedelic world or a lot of emotional work, whether that's nervous system regulation therapy, talk therapy, have worked through quite a bit of their emotions. They can actually handle that retesting and retracing generally a little bit better.
Oh
So
yeah.
your average person who's never done any work, you start to flood them with emotions from, I don't know, their girlfriend from high school or whatever whatever the hell comes up that they thought they forgot about for 20 years. That's a harder challenge because
Mm-hmm.
and it's still a challenge for the psychedelic group because when you sit with some kind of psychedelic, you're actually in a mind space of like, I'm going to work through something. And then in mineral balancing, I'm just like, hey, here's a random Wednesday. Your whole day is going to be fucked. Like, you're basically going to have to sit with this old memory and work through something. And so like your kind of like day-to-day life becomes like a ceremony that you have to work through. But when you have the tools, you understand it, you know that it's actually going to just move through. You're going to get it out. You're going to do an enema. It's going to go away. Things like that. A lot of times enemas do the trick. People hit me up, do an enema and you probably feel better. Make some space for it. And so, yeah, it's good to have the emotional work on the front end. I don't know if anything can prepare you for like a deep depression that mineral balancing can come with sometimes. But if you can just power through that, you're going to feel a lot better on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I always tell people I'm a general non-responder. Like I can do massive amounts of supplements. I used to do tons of drugs and, was pretty well centered and grounded compared to some of the other people in my circle. And even like during mineral balancing, you will face the old stuff, like that saying, the only way out is through. So whether it's heavy metal detox that's really uncomfortable or just the memories coming up, having those skills, whether it be through psychedelics or somatics or working one-on-one with someone to talk to them when those things come up, is just, you have to have that piece. It's so important.
For sure. With the toxicity, I've thought about this because I used to be able to tolerate like an insane amount of drugs as well. Like 2 to 3 times the amount of like other people sometimes when I'd be at a festival or at a rave or a party, which was like kind of insane. And I wonder like if the actual like heavy metals or toxicity are like messing with the neurochemistry and you're not actually getting the full experience of that drug, but you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling 10 times better than you did because you felt like shit anyways. And so
Yeah.
you take more to, so you just take more to reach where people are at. But I do think that less toxic people probably just get the normal experience of that said MDMA or, whatever drug that they're on. And I do think that that plays a role in addiction. I think when you have, them heavy metals that are disrupting neurochemistry, you don't feel that well. Mercury can mess with the NMDA receptors and you won't be able to reuptake your glutamate into GABA, which is like your calming neurotransmitter. So you're reaching for alcohol because you're not actually able to produce the GABA in the correct way. So I think that the metals messing with the neurochemistry lead you into that addiction. And like I said earlier, I think a lot of my drug use stemmed from me just trying to quell the neuroinflammation and just feel somewhat normal. I don't think I kind of like, I had a lot of trauma, but I actually had a pretty decent life. I graduated college. My family still loved me, who I did have without my dad. So there still was some trauma to work through. But I think a lot of it, as I healed, did stem from just the straight physical aspect of being super toxic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think more and more people are facing that as we go forward. So hopefully that will change. Today's election day. So
the threshold of it's actually a testament, I should say, to the human body that we've actually even put up with it for this long.
yeah.
We've been eating fast food, and fast food's not the fast food of the 80s. Like it's just straight seed oil, straight process, 100 ingredients in it. Like we've just been eating like trash, taking in heavy metals, taking in plastics, taking in molds, taking in probably chemicals from the environment. Fluoride's been in the water forever. And we're still kind of pushing through, but we're starting to
Yeah.
see collapse, in my opinion. It's slowly,
Definitely.
you see it in kids, you see it in, I just read a kid's hair test today that was insane on a first test.
Yeah.
Your kid,
Yeah.
Yes, he has every symptom that you're talking about because his hair test is insane. Every heavy metal off the chart, copper off the chart, manganese, like just ridiculous. And the kid's like 10. And so that's sad
Yeah.
because mom passes it down, grandma passes it down, and then slowly at some point there's a generation who can't tolerate it. It becomes too much. And we're starting to even see it, I think, with people around our age because we were good in the beginning, but now we're building it up over time as well. So like anyone who's like 40 and under is probably on a slow path to having some kind of neurological disease when they're older. And it's just mostly going to be because of aluminum and these other heavy metals.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to add though, my grandfather is 95 years old. He has every tooth filled with mercury. He was a chemical engineer. He still uses glyphosate on his garden. He lives in a 3-story house. He drinks whiskey every day and he smokes cigars nonstop. My grandmother died decades ago and he is still okay. So I don't want to freak people out. Like you can still survive and live a full life.
A lot of it does come down to, in my opinion, is the building blocks that he had from birth, just in general. The genetics were working, the enzymes were working, and then he still didn't get introduced to those until those glyphosates and a lot more of these heavy metals, chemtrails. He wasn't introduced till halfway through his life, at least, probably. So you have to think like that beginning point makes a big difference.
Yeah.
You put someone in today's shoes who's already born pretty toxic and then tries to replicate that, it's not going to work in the same manner because there's two different starting points there. And that's where people don't understand because they just look at their grandma and like, oh, she just smoked cigarettes and drank whiskey. I'm like, the starting point of that was so different from today. I mean, you can't even walk outside anywhere in the world basically without breathing in Bill Gates nanoparticles of aluminum. And you see aluminum high on every hair test, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Not a single hair test that's low in aluminum ever.
I had one person with pore eliminator on the first one, but she was in her 60s. So
yeah, it's crazy the amount of aluminum that we see come out and that we see, even if a person doesn't have enough energy to eliminate any of the other metals, the aluminum's still usually at least pretty elevated. And it's sad. And I think that geoengineering plays a big role in that. There's no way that we just like all these other metals we have a lot of, but then aluminum's just like this insanity amount on hair tests. And it just comes out for years. Like you just see it like boom, boom, boom. It just stays high for like years. I don't know if that's because it's easier to detox. Maybe it is a little bit easier, maybe a little bit softer, heavy metal or something. But the amounts that we see, I think that there's something more nefarious at play.
Yeah, could be. So this was great. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure we could talk at length about millions of other things, but would like to respect your time. So tell everyone where to find you, your podcast and your website and all that.
Yeah, so the name is Integrative Matt on Instagram. I talk a lot of shit over there on my stories and post a bunch of random stuff, but it's at Integrative Matt, so you can follow that, check out my page. The podcast is called Integrative Thoughts. Do a lot of mineral balancing stuff on there, but just a lot of just random shows in general, psychedelics, podcast with my wife about just life experiences. So a little bit of a mixed bag because if you only talk about mineral balancing, you're just never gonna have enough podcast episodes to even produce a podcast. So I probably got a couple hundred episodes out over the last few years. And then also Integrative Thoughts is the website. If you guys want to do an HTMA, if you're local, you can hit me up about Kambo. I'm in the Tampa, Florida area. So if you're anywhere around there, and yeah, hit me up.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone. I am just so thrilled that you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This has been a huge passion project for me and super therapeutic on top of that, helping me to use my voice and connect with other like-minded individuals. So if you're enjoying the podcast, please like and subscribe. Please share on social media or with your audience or friends or loved ones. I truly appreciate it. It does take a lot of time and financial costs to run the podcast, and it is not a moneymaker, let me tell you. So if you are enjoying this, I would truly appreciate your support just by sending me a post, a like, and a subscribe. Thank you so much.